The metal cage rattled violently as the alien inside threw herself against the bars once again. Taeyang Park flinched at the sound, his hands trembling as he adjusted his medical scanner. The creature inside the cage was unlike anything he had seen in his 2 years aboard the Celestial Dawn. She stood roughly his height, with pale violet skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the holding bay. Feline features marked her face with large amber eyes that burned with fury and fear. The most striking feature was the patterns across her skin that glowed with soft blue light, pulsing in rapid, angry rhythms. "She's been like this for 3 days, Captain Do-Yeon Choi said from behind him, his voice cold and businesslike. 3 days of attacks, refusing food, and injuring my crew members. I've had enough." Taeyang turned to face his captain, pushing his glasses up his nose nervously. "Sir, with respect, we haven't tried everything. The translation device isn't working properly. Maybe her species communicates differently than we assumed." The captain's expression hardened. "We assumed they would appreciate peaceful contact. Instead, they attacked our landing party the moment we touched down. This one was separated from her group during the fight. She's violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. The crew has started calling her feral. But sir, enough, Park." Captain Choi crossed his arms. "I've made my decision. We're dropping her on Moon LX-447. The atmospheric readings show it's compatible with her biology. She can survive there." Taeyang's stomach dropped. "You're going to abandon her alone?" "Not alone," the captain said with a thin smile. "You'll be staying with her." The words hit Taeyang like a physical blow. "What? You've been the most vocal about treating this creature with care. You've written 3 reports about alternative communication methods. You volunteered to handle her feeding even after she nearly took off Corporal Kim's hand." Captain Choi stepped closer, his voice dropping. "So here's your chance, Park, 5 days. You'll stay in a shelter on the moon with her. Observe her. See if she can survive. Try your communication theories. When we return from the Helios negotiations, we'll retrieve you both and you can present your findings." Taeyang's mind raced. 5 days alone with a creature everyone considered a monster. No backup, minimal supplies. His heart hammered in his chest, but something else stirred inside him too. This might be his only chance to prove that the alien wasn't a monster at all. "I'll do it," he said quietly. Captain Choi nodded. "Prepare yourself. We drop in 4 hours." The next few hours passed in a blur. Taeyang packed his personal belongings, medical supplies, and every piece of research material he could find about nonverbal communication in Earth animals. Dr. Minji Huang stopped by his quarters as he was packing. "You don't have to do this," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "The captain is being cruel. Everyone knows you're the lowest rank on this ship. He's punishing you for speaking up." Taeyang folded another shirt and placed it in his bag. "Maybe, but maybe this is also an opportunity. What if we're wrong about her? What if she's just scared?" Dr. Huang sighed. "Even if you're right, 5 days isn't enough time to prove it. And if you're wrong, you could die down there." "I know," Taeyang said, meeting her eyes. "But I have to try." The moon's surface was rocky and barren, with patches of strange purple vegetation dotting the landscape. The prefabricated shelter looked tiny against the vast emptiness. 2 crew members hauled the cage containing the alien off the shuttle, while Taeyang carried his supplies inside. The shelter was basic. A single room with a sleeping area, a small workstation, food storage, and a heating unit. The cage was placed in the corner, its occupant silent now, watching everything with those burning amber eyes. Captain Choi stood in the doorway of the shelter, silhouetted against the alien sky. 5 days, Park, the communication beacon is functional. If there's an emergency, signal us and we'll come back early. Otherwise, we'll retrieve you when we return." He paused, then added with something that might have been concern, "Try not to get yourself killed." Then he was gone. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and Taeyang watched through the small window as it lifted off, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of light against the purple sky. Then even that was gone. He was alone. Alone with an alien everyone called a monster. Taeyang turned slowly to face the cage. The alien stood perfectly still, watching him. Her bioluminescent patterns had changed from angry blue to something darker, almost purple. Her tail, long and flexible like a cat's, wrapped around her legs. She looked smaller somehow, less fierce and more frightened. "Hello," Taeyang said softly, even though he knew she couldn't understand. "My name is Taeyang. I know you're scared." "I'm scared too." The alien's head tilted slightly at the sound of his voice. Her patterns flickered, shifting through different colors. Taeyang carefully approached the workstation, making sure to move slowly and keep his movements visible. He pulled out his data pad and began making notes, watching her from the corner of his eye. She didn't attack the bars. She didn't growl or hiss. She just watched him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He realized that for the first time since her capture, she wasn't being approached by people who saw her as a specimen or a threat. She was being observed by someone who was trying to understand. Taeyang spent the next hour simply sitting at the workstation, occasionally glancing at her while he reviewed his research materials. He noticed things he hadn't seen before. The way her patterns pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, the way her ears, small and pointed, swiveled toward any sound, the way she kept her body angled so she could see both him and the door, as the alien sun set through the window, casting strange shadows across the shelter. Taeyang made his first decision. Tomorrow he would open the cage. He couldn't hope to communicate with her, to understand her if she remained a prisoner. It was a risk, possibly a fatal one, but it was the only way forward. He looked at her one more time before settling into his sleeping bag. Her patterns had shifted to a dark blue, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. In the dim light, she looked less like a monster and more like what she probably was, someone taken from her home, caged by strangers and terrified out of her mind. Tomorrow, Taeyang whispered to the darkness. We start over. The alien's patterns flickered once, then dimmed to almost nothing as she settled into a corner of her cage. Outside, the wind howled across the empty moon, and inside the tiny shelter, two beings from different worlds tried to sleep, both wondering what tomorrow would bring. The first rays of the alien sun woke Taeyang from a restless sleep. He sat up slowly, his muscles sore from the uncomfortable sleeping bag. The shelter was quiet except for the gentle hum of the heating unit. He turned his head toward the cage and froze. The alien was awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her cage, watching him. Her bioluminescent patterns glowed a soft orange in the early morning light. Her eyes tracked his every movement as he stood and stretched. There was something different about her gaze today. Less wild, more calculating. Taeyang moved to the food storage and pulled out a ration pack. His hands shook slightly as he opened it and ate, very aware of those amber eyes following him. When he finished, he pulled his datapad from his bag and reviewed the notes he had made yesterday. Pages and pages of observations about Earth animals, their body language, their communication methods. Somewhere in all this information had to be a key to understanding her. He looked at the cage again. The alien hadn't moved, but her patterns had shifted to a pale yellow. Her tail swished once, then stilled. Taeyang took a deep breath and stood up. This was it, the moment of truth. I'm going to open your cage now, he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. I don't think you're dangerous. I think you're scared. And I can't help you if you stay locked up. He walked slowly toward the cage, each step deliberate and visible. The alien's patterns flared brighter, shifting to blue. Warning colors, Taeyang thought. He stopped a few feet from the cage door and crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. Then he reached forward and pressed the release button. The cage door swung open with a soft click. Taeyang immediately backed away, moving to the far corner of the shelter. He sat down on the floor, making himself as small as possible, and lowered his eyes. It was a submissive posture in many Earth predators, a way of saying he wasn't a threat. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Taeyang didn't move. He could hear the alien shifting in her cage, the soft sound of her breathing. Finally, after what felt like hours, he heard the creak of metal as she moved. He didn't look up. He kept his eyes down, his body relaxed. He heard her footsteps, slow and careful, as she emerged from the cage. Through his peripheral vision, he could see her standing in the middle of the shelter, her body tense and ready to bolt. Her patterns flashed through several colors quickly, blue, orange, yellow, then settling on a cautious green. She didn't attack. She didn't run. She just stood there, processing her newfound freedom. Taeyang waited 10 more minutes before slowly raising his head, but he kept his eyes averted, not making direct eye contact. The alien had moved to the opposite corner of the shelter, as far from him as possible while still being inside. She was crouched low, her body coiled like a spring. That's okay, Taeyang said softly. Take your time. I'm not going to hurt you. He stood up slowly and moved to the workstation, giving her space. He pulled out a ration pack and placed it on the floor halfway between them, then retreated back to his corner. The alien watched him but didn't approach the food. Taeyang wasn't surprised. He had read in the reports that she had refused all food offered by the crew. Over the next few hours, Taeyang worked at his station, occasionally placing different items on the floor. Water, various ration packs, even a piece of fabric. The alien ignored all of them, but she watched. She was always watching. Her patterns had settled into a steady green glow, less agitated than before. It wasn't until late afternoon that Taeyang decided to venture outside. He needed to survey the area and collect samples of the local vegetation. Maybe, just maybe, the alien would eat something native to an environment similar to her own world. He moved toward the door slowly, making sure the alien could see what he was doing. "I'm going outside," he said, pointing to the door. "I'll be back soon." The alien's patterns flickered, but she didn't move. Taeyang opened the door and stepped out into the strange landscape. The purple vegetation he had seen from the shuttle was actually more varied up close. There were tall reed-like plants swaying in the breeze, low bushes with thick, rubbery leaves, and scattered patches of something that looked like moss but glowed faintly. Taeyang spent an hour collecting samples, carefully documenting each one. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice the alien had followed him outside until he turned around and saw her standing about 20 feet away. His heart jumped, but he forced himself to remain calm. She was looking at the vegetation, her head tilted in what seemed like curiosity. Slowly she approached one of the bushes and touched its leaves with her three-fingered hand. Then, to Taeyang's surprise, she plucked a leaf and ate it. He watched in amazement as she moved from plant to plant, testing different vegetation. Some she ate, others she sniffed and rejected. She was foraging, of course. She wouldn't eat processed rations when her biology was adapted for natural food sources. Taeyang made careful notes on which plants she selected. When she finally seemed satisfied, she moved away from him again, settling on a rock outcropping to watch the alien sunset. Taeyang finished his work and headed back to the shelter, leaving the door open behind him. The alien didn't follow immediately, but an hour later, as darkness fell, she slipped back inside. She didn't return to her cage. Instead, she settled in the far corner, curling up with her tail wrapped around her body. Her patterns dimmed to a faint glow, just enough light to see her by. Taeyang prepared his own dinner and settled into his sleeping bag. It had been a good day. Progress had been made, but he knew tomorrow would bring new challenges. He was right. The storm hit in the middle of the night. Taeyang woke to the sound of wind howling outside, so loud it seemed like the shelter might tear apart. Rain lashed against the walls in sheets. Through the window, he could see lightning crackling across the purple sky. He sat up quickly, checking the shelter's integrity. Everything seemed stable, but the noise was deafening. Then he saw the alien. She was pressed into the corner, her entire body shaking. Her patterns flashed rapidly through every color he had seen. Blue, orange, yellow, red, and colors he didn't have names for. She was terrified. Taeyang realized why immediately. The enclosed shelter, the loud noises, the feeling of being trapped. It must have reminded her of the cage, of the ship, of her capture. She was having a panic response. He moved slowly toward the door, grabbing tarps and support poles from the supply crates. The alien watched him, her eyes wide with fear. Taeyang opened the door, letting in a blast of wind and rain, and began setting up a makeshift shelter outside, attached to the main structure but open on one side. He worked quickly, getting drenched in the process. When he was done, he had created a covered area that provided protection from the rain but wasn't fully enclosed. He sat down under it, rain still hitting him from the open side, and waited. Minutes passed. Then slowly the alien emerged from the shelter. She looked at him, then at the open-sided cover he had created. Her patterns shifted to a soft purple. She moved carefully into the space, positioning herself where she was protected, but could still see the open landscape. Taeyang stayed where he was, sitting in the rain, showing her it was safe. Eventually, she settled down, her shaking subsiding. Her patterns gradually calmed to a steady blue. They sat together like that for hours, weathering the storm side by side. Not touching, not speaking, but together. When the rain finally stopped just before dawn, they were both exhausted and soaked. Taeyang stood and moved back toward the shelter. The alien followed, but this time when they both settled down to dry off near the heating unit, she chose a spot only a few feet away from him. As Taeyang's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, He heard a sound. Soft, almost musical. The alien was making a noise, not a hiss or growl, but something gentle. A question, maybe. Or a thank you. "You're welcome," Taiyang whispered back, not caring that she couldn't understand the words. But maybe, just maybe, she understood the meaning. Day 4 began with a discovery that changed everything. Taiyang woke to find the alien sitting near the workstation, studying his datapad with intense curiosity. Her patterns glowed a bright, inquisitive yellow. When she noticed he was awake, she didn't retreat. Instead, she touched the screen, making it light up, then looked at him expectantly. Taiyang sat up slowly, his mind racing. She was interested in communication. She wanted to understand just as much as he did. He moved carefully to the workstation and sat down, making sure to leave plenty of space between them. The alien shifted slightly but held her ground. He pulled up a simple drawing program on the datapad and sketched a basic circle. Then he handed the device to her, gesturing for her to try. The alien's 3-fingered hand hesitated over the screen. Then she touched it, dragging her finger to create a line. Her patterns flared bright with what could only be excitement. For the next hour, they took turns drawing. Taiyang would sketch something simple, a sun, a moon, a plant. The alien would study it, then create her own images. Her drawings were different, alien, but he could see intelligence in them, patterns and shapes that clearly held meaning. Then Taiyang had an idea. He created a simple color chart and pointed to his own skin, then drew a figure colored with a pale peach tone. He pointed to the alien and gestured to her to do the same. She watched him carefully, then selected a violet color and drew her own figure. Her patterns pulsed with that same excited yellow. They were building a shared language, not words but images and colors and meaning. Taiyang began associating his drawings with her bioluminescent patterns. When she drew food, her patterns shifted to a specific shade of green. When she drew what he thought might be her home, they turned a soft gold touched with sadness. When she drew the ship that had captured her, angry red patterns flashed across her skin, but it was slow work. Complex ideas were difficult to convey with simple pictures. Taiyang needed more data, more observations. He pulled up his notes from the past 3 days and began reviewing the patterns he had recorded. Each emotion seemed to have a corresponding color or combination of colors. He started building a chart, correlating patterns with contexts. The alien watched him work with intense focus. At one point, she reached out and touched the screen, pointing to a pattern he had labeled as fear. She made a soft sound. Then her patterns shifted to that exact shade of purple-blue. She was confirming his interpretation. Taiyang's heart raced with excitement. "Yes," he said, nodding vigorously. "Yes, that's fear. You understand." The alien's patterns shifted to bright yellow again. She understood that he understood. It was a breakthrough. They spent the rest of the morning building their visual vocabulary. Taiyang would act out emotions or actions, and the alien would respond with her patterns, which he would document. Happy was a soft gold. Curious was yellow. Tired was a dim blue. Angry was sharp red. And there were more. So many more subtle variations that he was only beginning to grasp. By early afternoon, they had established a basic system. When the alien wanted to communicate something, she would combine her light patterns with drawings on the datapad. It was clumsy and limited, but it worked. She could express basic needs and feelings. He could respond in kind. That was when she drew something that made Taiyang's blood run cold. A simple sketch of the shelter, with 2 figures inside. Then she drew figures outside. Many figures, and she colored them with the same purple vegetation colors of the planet's native predators. Her patterns flashed warning red. Danger. Outside. Coming. Taiyang rushed to the window and looked out. At first he saw nothing. Then as his eyes adjusted to the strange light of the alien sunset, he spotted them. 6 shapes moving through the vegetation low to the ground. They were large, easily twice the size of earth wolves, with 6 legs and reptilian features. They moved with the coordinated precision of pack hunters. His hands shook as he pulled the plasma rifle from the supply crate. He had basic training with the weapon, but he had never fired it outside of simulation. The creatures were getting closer, spreading out to surround the shelter. They had clearly identified it as containing prey. The alien stood next to him at the window, her patterns shifting rapidly between red and a color he hadn't seen before. A deep, pulsing crimson that seemed to vibrate with intensity. She moved toward the door. No, Taeyang said, grabbing her arm without thinking. She turned to look at him, and he realized it was the first time he had touched her. Her skin was warm, almost hot to the touch. You don't have to go out there. But she gently pulled her arm free and pointed at him, then at the corner of the shelter. Her pattern shifted to a specific combination, protective gold mixed with that deep crimson. She was telling him to stay back. She was going to protect him. Before he could stop her, she opened the door and stepped outside. The predators froze, their attention instantly shifting to this new presence. The alien stood in front of the shelter door, her body perfectly still. Then her patterns exploded with brilliant crimson light, so bright Taeyang had to shield his eyes. And she made a sound. It wasn't like any sound he had heard from her before. It was deep, resonating, a vibration that he could feel in his chest, in his bones, in his very core. The sound rolled across the landscape like thunder, like an earthquake, like the roar of something ancient and powerful. The predators scattered. They didn't fight, didn't challenge her. They simply ran, their 6 legs carrying them away at incredible speed until they disappeared into the distance. The alien stood there for a moment longer, her pattern slowly dimming from that brilliant crimson to a calmer red, then to blue. She turned and walked back into the shelter, closing the door behind her. She looked tired, her movement slower than usual. Taeyang stared at her in awe. "You saved me," he whispered. She moved to the datapad and drew quickly. A figure in front of another figure, both surrounded by a circle. Then she pointed to him and to herself. Her patterns shifted to that protective gold. Taeyang understood. She was saying they protected each other. They were together. He nodded, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "Together," he repeated. That night, as they settled down to sleep, the alien did something unprecedented. She moved closer to him, not quite touching, but near enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Her patterns glowed a soft, peaceful blue. She had chosen to trust him completely. Taeyang lay awake for a long time, watching the gentle pulse of her bioluminescence in the darkness. Tomorrow was day 5. The celestial dawn was supposed to return tomorrow. And suddenly he wasn't sure he wanted to leave. They had made so much progress. They were finally beginning to understand each other. As if sensing his thoughts, the alien stirred slightly. Her patterns flickered once, a quick flash of gold, then settled back into that peaceful blue. In that moment, Taeyang understood something profound. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't even really alien. She was a person, intelligent and feeling, scared and brave, capable of trust and protection and maybe even friendship. He had come here expecting to observe a specimen. Instead, he had found someone worth knowing, someone worth protecting, someone who had chosen to protect him in return. When the signal came from the celestial dawn early the next morning, saying they would arrive in just a few hours instead of the scheduled time, Taeyang felt his stomach drop. He wasn't ready. They weren't ready. He sent a message back. They needed more time. But the response was firm. Captain Choi was arriving early and retrieval was imminent. Taeyang looked at the alien who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. Her patterns shifted to questioning yellow. He pulled up the datapad and drew the ship, then drew it arriving. Her patterns immediately flashed warning red. He drew himself and her together. Then he drew them with the ship, with other humans. Her patterns flickered uncertainly. She was afraid, he realized. Afraid of going back to the cage, to being treated as a monster. "I won't let them hurt you," Taeyang said firmly. He drew a protective circle around both their figures. "I promise." Her patterns shifted to that gold color again. The color that meant protector. The color that meant trust. The shuttle descended through the purple sky like a falling star. Taeyang stood outside the shelter with the alien beside him, watching it approach. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Everything they had built over the past 5 days was about to be tested. The alien's patterns flickered nervously between yellow and blue. Taeyang reached out slowly and touched her shoulder, the way she had touched his the night before. Her patterns steadied slightly, shifting to a cautious green. She trusted him. He couldn't let her down. The shuttle landed 50 meters away, kicking up dust and debris. The door opened and Captain Choi emerged, followed by Dr. Minji Huang and 2 security officers. They were all armed. Taeyang felt the alien tense beside him, her patterns shifting toward warning red. "It's okay," he said softly, not taking his eyes off the approaching crew. "I won't let them hurt you." Captain Choi stopped a few meters away, his expression unreadable. He looked at Taiyang, then at the alien standing freely beside him, then back at Taiyang. "You're alive," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been surprise or relief. "Yes, sir," Taiyang replied, "and I've made significant progress. She's not feral. She's intelligent and capable of communication. She's uncaged," one of the security officers said, raising his weapon slightly. "Park, step away from her slowly." The alien's patterns flared bright red. She moved slightly in front of Taiyang, a protective gesture that everyone noticed. Captain Choi raised his hand, stopping the security officers from advancing. "Interesting," Dr. Huang said, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "She's exhibiting protective behavior." "Park, what happened here?" Taiyang quickly explained their breakthrough with the visual communication system. The correlation between her bioluminescent patterns and her emotional states, and how they had built a basic shared language. As he spoke, he pulled up his datapad and showed them the extensive documentation he had created. "This is remarkable," Dr. Huang breathed, scrolling through the data. "Park, this is groundbreaking work. If this is accurate, we completely misunderstood her species from the start." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Taiyang said firmly. "We landed in their territory without permission. We couldn't communicate with them because our translation technology only works with vocal languages, and when they tried to defend their home, we labeled them as violent. We caused this situation." Captain Choi's expression hardened. "Those are serious accusations, Park." "They're not accusations, sir. They're facts." Taiyang held up the datapad. She drew it for me. "We landed in what she indicated was a sacred place. Her people weren't attacking without reason. They were defending their home from what they saw as invaders." The captain was silent for a long moment. Taiyang could see the conflict on his face. Admitting this kind of mistake would have serious consequences for his career, for his reputation. But ignoring it would mean throwing away a genuine chance at first contact. "I want to see this communication system in action," Captain Choi said finally. "Prove to me that she's actually communicating, not just reacting to stimuli." Taiyang turned to the alien and held up the datapad. Her patterns had calmed slightly to an uncertain yellow. He drew a simple question, the captain's figure with a question mark. The alien studied it, then took the device. She drew the captain with hard angles, then surrounded him with red color. But then she drew Taiyang next to him, colored with gold, and drew a line connecting them. Dr. Huang gasped. "She's saying he's dangerous but connected to you, someone she trusts. She's making a judgment call about social relationships." The alien wasn't done. She drew the ship, then drew her own people below it. She drew what looked like stones or markers, then colored them with a special pattern. She looked at Taiyang and made a specific sound, her pattern shifting to a reverent purple gold. "Sacred ground," Taiyang translated. "She's showing us that we landed on sacred ground. That's why her people attacked." Captain Choi stepped forward, studying the datapad. "Ask her why she attacked the crew members on the ship." Taiyang drew the question as best he could. The alien, the cage, the crew members approaching. The alien's patterns immediately flashed angry red. She drew rapidly, her three-fingered hands moving with sharp, aggressive strokes. She drew the cage, then drew hands reaching through bars, drew pain symbols he had come to recognize. She drew no way to communicate, no way to explain, no way to ask for help. She was defending herself, Dr. Huang said quietly. She was trapped in pain, unable to communicate. Of course she fought back. "This doesn't change the fact that she injured my crew," Captain Choi said. But his voice had lost some of its hardness. "With respect, sir," Taiyang said, "how would you react if an alien species captured you, caged you, and you couldn't explain that you were a person, not an animal?" The captain had no response to that. The group stood in tense silence, the wind whistling across the barren moon. Then Dr. Huang spoke up. "Captain, I recommend we return to Volantrian space. With the alien as a willing ambassador, not a captive, Park has created a functional communication bridge. We could use this to initiate actual first contact the right way." "That would require admitting our initial approach was flawed," the captain said. "Yes, sir, it would," Dr. Huang replied. "But it would also mean making history. Real first contact based on understanding and respect, not force." Captain Choi looked at the alien, who stood watching him with those intense amber eyes, her patterns a cautious blue. Then he looked at Taiyang. You would stay with her? Act as her liaison? Yes, sir. It could be dangerous. Her people might not be forgiving. I know, sir. But it's the right thing to do. The captain seemed to age 10 years in that moment. Then he nodded slowly. Very well. We'll do it your way, Park, but the moment things get dangerous... He was interrupted by a sharp warning sound from the shuttle. One of the security officers checked his scanner and paled. Sir, we have incoming ships. Multiple contacts. They're Volantrian. Everything happened at once. The security officers raised their weapons. The alien's patterns exploded into brilliant red, and Taiyang threw himself between her and the guns, spreading his arms wide. Stand down. Captain Choi barked at his officers. Then more quietly to Taiyang, Are you insane? If you want to shoot her, Taiyang said, his voice shaking but determined, you'll have to shoot through me first. The alien made a sound, soft and surprised. Her patterns shifted from red to something else, something Taiyang hadn't seen before. A deep glowing gold that seemed to pulse from within her very core. She touched his shoulder gently, then stepped around him to face the crew directly. She held up the data pad and drew rapidly, a figure protecting another figure. Then she pointed at Taiyang and drew a symbol, a specific combination of patterns and shapes. She looked at him, her patterns glowing that deep gold, and made a sound that was almost reverent. What did she just say? Captain Choi asked. Taiyang's throat was tight. She called me her protector. Dr. Huang was studying the data pad, her eyes wide. Park, this symbol she drew. Based on your pattern translations, I think it's more than that. It's a title, a bond. She's saying you're bonded to her as her chosen protector. The alien's patterns pulsed with that golden light, and for the first time since her capture, she looked peaceful. Not afraid, not angry, but calm, because she had someone who stood with her, someone who chose to understand rather than condemn, someone who saw her as a person. In the sky above, the Volantrian ships drew closer, their approach patterns aggressive and defensive. Captain Choi looked at the alien, at Taiyang, at the incoming ships, and made his decision. Get everyone on the shuttle, he ordered. We're heading back to the Celestial Dawn, and then we're going to Volantris. It's time for proper first contact. As they boarded the shuttle, the alien stayed close to Taiyang. Her patterns remained that deep, peaceful gold. She had found her protector, and he had found his purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The journey back to Volantrian space took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which Taiyang and the alien, who had finally shared her name through their visual system as Nari, worked to expand their communication bridge. Dr. Huang helped, her scientific expertise combining with Taiyang's intuitive understanding to create something remarkable. They discovered that Volantrian communication was far more complex than anyone had imagined. The bioluminescent patterns weren't just emotional displays. They were an entire language with grammar and syntax encoded in color, intensity, and rhythm. The soft sounds Nari made weren't words but harmonic markers that added context to the light patterns. And beneath it all was something even more profound. Volantrians could sense emotions in others, reading the subtle electromagnetic fields that all living beings produced. That's why we seem so alien to them, Dr. Huang explained during one of their research sessions. To Volantrians, humans must appear emotionally dead. Our electromagnetic signatures are so different from theirs that we barely register on their empathic senses. We must have seemed like walking corpses to them. Nari's patterns pulsed in confirmation, a specific shade of blue that they had learned meant agreement. She drew on the datapad, showing how her people experienced the world as a blend of visual, auditory, and emotional information. Humans, with their reliance on verbal language and limited emotional broadcasting, had been completely incomprehensible to them. The breakthrough came when Dr. Huang created a translation interface that could display Nari's light patterns as visual text in real time. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. For the first time since her capture, Nari could communicate complex ideas to the crew. Her first complete message brought tears to Taiyang's eyes. Thank you for seeing me as a person. Captain Choi spent long hours in his ready room, preparing his report and his approach to the Volantrian people. He consulted with Taiyang and Nari frequently, learning about their culture, their values, their fears. The captain had changed during the journey. The hard, pragmatic officer had given way to someone more thoughtful, more willing to admit mistakes. I was wrong, he told Taiyang one evening in the mess hall. I approached first contact like a military operation, not a diplomatic mission. I saw your compassion as weakness when it was actually our greatest strength. As they approached Volantrian space, the tension aboard the Celestial Dawn was overwhelming. The crew knew they were entering potentially hostile territory. They were returning Nari to her people, but they were also the ones who had taken her in the first place. The Volantrian ships appeared on sensors long before they reached the planet. Dozens of them, sleek and organic-looking, moved to intercept the Celestial Dawn. Captain Choi ordered all weapon systems shut down and broadcast a message of peaceful intent. But there was no response. Nari stood on the bridge, her patterns flickering with anxiety. Taeyang stood beside her, his presence a calming influence. Through the translation interface, she sent a message. My people are afraid, angry. They do not understand why you have returned. Can you talk to them? Captain Choi asked. Nari's pattern shifted to uncertain yellow. I will try. She moved to the communications console and Dr. Huang modified it to transmit her bioluminescent patterns. Nari began to communicate, her patterns flowing through complex sequences that made beautiful shifting colors across the screen. She spoke for nearly 10 minutes, telling her story, explaining what had happened, describing Taeyang's kindness and the crew's willingness to make amends. The response came in a burst of aggressive red patterns. The lead Volantrian ship was demanding Nari's immediate return and the humans' withdrawal from their space. Captain Choi looked at Nari, who translated the message with sad blue patterns. They do not trust, she communicated. They want me home. They want you gone. Then we'll take you home, Captain Choi said. We'll go to them. Taeyang, you'll accompany Nari to the Volantrian flagship. You'll be our ambassador. Taeyang's stomach dropped. Sir, I'm not a diplomat. No, the captain agreed. But you're the human Nari trusts. You're the one who chose to see her as a person when no one else did. If anyone can bridge this gap, it's you. The shuttle that took them to the Volantrian flagship was small and felt even smaller with the weight of what they were attempting. Nari sat across from Taeyang, her patterns shifting through anxious colors. When they docked with the Volantrian ship, the doors opened to reveal a dozen Volantrians, all with patterns blazing warning red. One stepped forward, larger than Nari, with deep violet skin and battle scars across his arms. His patterns were aggressive, challenging. Through the translation interface, his message was clear. You took my sister. Why should we not take you? Taeyang's hands shook, but he stood his ground. Through the interface, he sent his response. Because I am here to return her. Because I am here to apologize. Because I know we were wrong. The Volantrian, who Nari indicated was her brother Jinho, studied him with those intense amber eyes. Then Nari stepped between them, her patterns exploding in that deep golden color. She communicated rapidly, her patterns flowing through complex sequences that Taeyang could only partially follow. But he caught key concepts: protector, trust, bridge between peoples. Jinho's patterns flickered with surprise, then shifted to a questioning yellow. He and Nari communicated back and forth, their patterns moving so fast the translation interface struggled to keep up. Finally, Jinho turned to Taeyang and made a gesture, inviting him deeper into the ship. They walked through corridors of organic material that pulsed with gentle light. Other Volantrians watched as they passed, their patterns ranging from curious yellow to suspicious orange. Finally, they entered a large chamber where an older Volantrian waited. Her patterns glowed with authority and wisdom, shifting through complex colors that spoke of age and experience. My mother, Nari communicated. Clan leader Yuna. Yuna studied Taeyang for a long moment. Then she began to communicate, her patterns deliberate and clear. The translation interface worked hard to convert her message. My daughter says you protected her when others abandoned her. You chose to understand when others chose to fear. Why? Taeyang thought carefully before responding. Because she was scared and alone. Because I knew she was a person, not a monster. Because understanding is always better than fear. Yuna's patterns shifted through several colors, processing his response. Then she communicated something that made Nari's patterns flare with surprise. The translation appeared. You will stay on Volantris. You will be our first human ambassador. You will teach us about your people, and we will teach you about ours. An exchange of trust. Taeyang felt his breath catch. Stay on Volantris? Leave everything he knew behind? He looked at Nari, whose patterns glowed with hopeful gold. He thought about the past 3 weeks, about everything they had learned, about the bridge they had started to build. "And what about the celestial dawn?" he asked. "My son will go with them," Yuna communicated. "He will be our observer in your space. Equal exchange. Equal risk." Jinho's patterns flickered with surprise, but he bowed his head in acceptance. It was a bold proposal, one that required trust from both sides. But it was also fair. Both species would have someone in the other's territory, both vulnerable and valued. Taeyang thought about his small quarters on the Celestial Dawn, about his career as a junior medic, about everything he had known. Then he thought about the opportunity before him. To be the first human to truly live among another species, to continue building the bridge he and Nari had started, to prove that humans could be more than conquerors or collectors of specimens. They could be friends. "I accept," he said. The negotiations took hours. Captain Choi, brought aboard the Volantrian flagship for formal discussions, worked with clan leader Yuna to establish protocols. Dr. Huang shared all their research on Volantrian communication. Jinho prepared to board the Celestial Dawn as their observer and ambassador. And through it all, Nari stayed close to Taeyang, her patterns glowing that protective gold. When the Celestial Dawn finally prepared to depart, Taeyang stood in the docking bay with Nari beside him. Captain Choi approached, his expression serious but not unkind. "You're giving up everything familiar, Park," he said. "No, sir," Taeyang replied. "I'm gaining something new. You did good work here. Real good work." The captain extended his hand and Taeyang shook it. "Make us proud out there. Show them what humanity can be at its best." "I'll try, sir." Dr. Huang hugged him, which surprised them both. "You changed everything, you know. This will reshape how we approach first contact forever." Then they were gone. The shuttle carrying them back to the Celestial Dawn along with Jinho, whose patterns flickered with nervous yellow but determined resolve. Taeyang watched through the viewport as the human ship slowly pulled away, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a point of light against the stars. He felt Nari's hand on his shoulder, warm and steady. Her patterns glowed peaceful blue, mixed with that golden protector color. Through the translation interface, she sent a simple message: "Home, together, build." Taeyang smiled and turned to face her fully. Around them, other Volantrians gathered, their patterns showing curiosity, hope, and cautious welcome. He was on an alien world, surrounded by an alien people, about